We'll all have it at some point. We'll all have like that deep rage. We'll all have that deep desire. We'll all have the deep love, the deep longing. But if we don't have any kind of access to what it is or what it means, how do you work through it other than a destructive thing? Because love can be very destructive, like the really deep, you know, that can be very consuming as well in a very unhealthy way. So it's, yeah, that's what I'm always like, God, if everyone just took an acting class, one acting class, I think it would really help us all.
My name is Simon Waller, and this is the Future with Friends podcast, a show where I make zero attempt to try and predict the future, even though I'm a trained futurist, and instead I enlist my friends to do it for me. Thankfully, I have some very smart and insightful friends. Some of them are best-selling authors. Most will be considered leading thinkers in their field of expertise. I guarantee that every single one of them will have compelling and unique insights to share about what might happen next. Each episode, I invite a friend onto the show to explore the future of anything that they would like. I then task them to go away and create a short scenario about that future set at least 5 years from now, something that captures their hopes and dreams or maybe their fears and concerns. And then over the course of the show, we dissect that scenario. We start to think about the critical uncertainties, the alternate possibilities, and the decisions that we can make today to create the future that we want tomorrow. Welcome to The Future with Friends. Hello and welcome to The Future with Friends. Today we're going to be exploring the future of acting with a friend of mine, the wonderful Megan Davis. Now, Megan is a business storyteller who has a deep love for acting and all things screen and stage. This scenario she shares has actually been inspired by an interview she saw recently with a high-powered Hollywood director who suggested that in 5 short years we might be able to dispense with human actors altogether. That we'll just feed a script into a machine and out will spit these AI-generated bots that we can then move around on a green screen to create any movie that we want to create. And this has obviously challenged Megan's sensibilities about what it means to be an actor and even the role of acting within society more broadly. She looks at this partly through the lens of the actors themselves, but also through the emotional turmoil that our AI bots may need to go through if they're going to be sharing the full spectrum of human experience with people in the audience. It's a really interesting conversation that goes very deeply into what it means to be human and perhaps some of the challenges we have in our modern world where the spectrum of emotions we're expected to experience and exhibit on a daily basis has become a whole lot narrower. It also answers some really interesting questions around how is it that when we have a profession or a skill of acting that actually has played out over millennia, what will happen to these people when we take away the screens and the stages for them to perform on? Welcome to The Future with Friends. Welcome to episode 6 of The Future with Friends. Today I'm being joined by a friend of mine, Megan Davis. Now, Megan, I met a few years ago. We did a little bit of work together in her role as a storytelling expert. And we got talking again recently about the power of story, the use of it in scenarios and futures thinking. And I shared with her the podcast I just started and has been the case now with a lot of friends when I talk to them. It's like, hey, if you could talk about the future of anything, what would you talk about? And Megan surprised me a little bit with her choice. And so I thought, best thing to do is just get her on the show. Megan, welcome to The Future with Friends.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. So much to talk about. A juicy topic, I think.
I think it's going to be a very juicy topic. And I think it's one of those ones whereby there is a lot of tangential lessons to be learned, which we'll kind of dive into in a little bit. But can you share your memory of how we met and where the friendship was made?
I I I have to say I don't know the exact second. I couldn't pinpoint that. But what I do but I do remember that I had an event called The Evolution of Storytelling. You were definitely there. And you contacted me afterwards and said, I reached out to several of your speakers about this this idea I have around choose your own adventure style keynote speaking. And no one got back to me. And I thought, how weird. Why would no one want to talk to you about that? So then you're like, maybe you can help. And I was like, yeah, definitely. Let's let's dive into that. And but I obviously knew you before the event, but I think that was the first time I had a protracted, really long, in-depth conversation with you.
Yeah, that's what my memory was as well. So snap, you know.
Yeah. 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 Perfect.
Yeah, and I do remember, I think we worked together for, I reckon it was over a few months that we
Yeah.
were trying to work this out. And I learned so much about storytelling and the power of storytelling in both in keynotes, but in how we kind of engage people in conversations around the future. And I don't think I still quite landed the Choose Your Own Adventure keynote. It sits in my brain though all the time, and every now and then it kind of resurfaces. And I think
Mm,
how is it that we could kind of share with people these more nuanced conversations around what unfolds in the future. But
mm,
for now, we get to talk about something that's very important to you. Do you want to share a little bit about your topic that you've chosen when you could talk about the future of
mhm.
anything? You have chosen the
Yeah.
future of.
Acting.
Now tell us why the
Um,
future of acting.
yeah, so I started acting when I was 7, and I took a break, a long break. Part of that was because I moved here and I started studying photography, and my life took this very different turn. And then I guess I thought I can't run a business and be an actor, which is just so stupid. And so then after the pandemic, like everyone else, I was like, why, reevaluating your life. And you're like, okay, why did I stop acting? It was a stupid thing to do because I love it so much. And it was part of like the first quarter of my life, if not more, like the first 20 years of my life. So I was like, all right, I'm just gonna start doing it again. And I did, and it's been like this really interesting process of it's hard to even say. It's like this whole new process of understanding who I am now and what that brings to acting. Because as you mature and age, your depth of what you know about yourself is greater. And so the depth of what you can bring to a character expands. And so it's like relearning all the tools that I used to have and then realizing a lot of them don't work anymore and that I needed more training and then understanding what that training was and re-engaging and then booking work and understanding the business side of acting more as a mature business owner as well. Like putting all that together and then going, wow, and I remember last year I went to New York and I did this week long, sorry, no, it was 2 weeks of training that completely transformed my life to the point where when the person who ran the sessions said, do you feel like you're a better actor? I said, I'm a better person.
Wow,
That's how profound this experience has been.
that's so
So
interesting.
that brings us up to today, I guess. Why I decided I wanted to talk about this.
Yeah, yeah. And so one thing that I found when I've approached friends to come on the show, I have a lot of friends like yourself that I imagine would say that they have a real deep connection to their work. So
Mm,
the fact that you do, this storytelling work is something that, if I said to a lot of people, you could speak about the future of anything, they would go, well, I'm actually really happy to talk about the future of storytelling or whatever it is their expertise is, because they do feel a deep connection to it. What I've actually also found, though, is sometimes the thing that they do day to day is actually a tangent of the thing that they really care about. And they have this thing, and I wonder, this is for you, like you had this thing when you were younger around acting, and you kind of go, yeah, but can't really make a business out of that. It's a pretty hard slog. You got to be lucky. You've got to put that work in. Not everyone gets discovered. And so you kind of find a tangent of that, which is just slightly more palatable in terms of its commercial acumen. And then that doesn't quite work. And we end up on a tangent of a tangent. which is still kind of related to what it was that really deeply motivated us, but it's not what we originally had. And I just wonder if that's in any way, does that relate, does that resonate with you at all in terms of that journey?
Uh, I want to say yes, but I don't feel like that's the right answer because the
because
business,
the business
yeah, it's like I think it's such a good idea that you put forward, but I'm not sure that that's really what happened to me. So first thing is I started my business completely accidentally. It was not ever my intention to do what I do now at all. So that accident, a series of interesting accidents that I was lucky enough that at the time I put my ear to the ground and listened to what was going on, made me say, oh, I can do this and maybe the other stuff. Um, and so I started this business, but it was never my intention to do what I do now. And I think the other thing is that the thing about acting is that it's not a job. It's not a profession. Like it's like we use those terms if we get monetarily compensated. It is a thing that once you do it and you do it well to a particular certain level. I mean, I'm not talking about playing a tree in third grade, which I think everyone should do. I would never tell someone, don't ever say no to any opportunity to be on stage and to express yourself, right? But something that goes a bit deeper where through your exploration of humanity and yourself and other people, this doorway opens into this other place where you realize that it's almost like a spiritual calling. And you, if you say no to that, then it's like walking away from humanity or yourself. It feels completely impossible. Like, stop, don't breathe, don't eat, don't sleep. Um, because it's so powerful. I remember talking to a person who and I can't remember who they were. It was like a brief fleeting conversation with someone I didn't know. But she said to me, my one of my kids started acting and I went to the show and it was like a community theater. So it was, you know, like people of all different ages, not like a kids show at their school or anything, and there was lots of young people cast in this show, and she spoke to a number of them and was so impressed at how articulate, how they were confident speaking to adults, how they had a lot of agency and drive, and they did what they had to do, and they didn't ask for anything other than the opportunity to go and to be and to do. And she was like, I had all my other kids did a lot of sports, which is also valuable. She said, but the maturity and the confidence and the way that these young people interacted showed me that they understood that humanity is a whole. That in order to put on a show, you need everyone. You need people of all ages, all shapes and sizes, all looks, all ethnicities, the background people like the crew. You do not have anything without those people. The complete integration that she saw, and she was like, I was so impressed by that. And I said, yeah. I said, I mean, that's what happens. A door opens and you see everything differently for the entire rest of your life. And if you keep going, you become something that you never thought you could become. And I'm not saying this is the only avenue. Obviously, there are so many avenues to becoming and continuing to become. But I feel that this is so fundamental to the human experience of discovery, this discovery through play, and acting, and understanding so much on so many levels, and going places that are hard to go and experiencing it. So other people, either because they've had to and they're processing it, or they don't ever have to, hopefully, but opening ourselves up. Like sometimes I feel like there's almost a sacrifice. I feel this so that you can or don't have to. And we take ourselves places that can sometimes scare us, but we have to. We
Yeah, that's
have
so
to do.
interesting. And I do love something that resonated in what you just said there. Like when I talk about scenarios from a future's perspective, this idea that the future is a safe place to have difficult conversations. It's something that is familiar enough for us to kind of see how we got there, but also gives us a chance to perhaps tackle challenging ideas or concepts because it's not now and it's not me.
Mhm.
It's a version of me or a future person in my role or in my job or in my business, and we can talk about it from a slightly more objective perspective. And I kind of wonder. I heard that in what you were saying in that by that acting gives the audience the opportunity to look at something that might feel familiar but is just different enough for it to be hypothetical. And that's really lovely. Tell us now, we're going to
Mhm.
jump into the scenario in a second. One of the things I asked you as well, you have to pick a year. Like, where is your when and where is your scenario set?
Yeah. I've had a hard time really pinpointing when I think this happens, but I would say it's probably 30-ish years from now because I've seen like different directors talking about in 5 years time. I've actually read these like interviews and they're like in years time you'll take a script and feed it into a machine and it'll spit out a whole movie. And it'll be there'll be actors, it'll be directed, it'll be everything and you'll just as a director you'll just go through and tweak. And I thought I can't tell if this guy thinks this is a good idea or a bad idea, but also I cannot see how in 5 years that it's going to happen to this extent, right? Like that's a very extreme, that's so extreme.
Yeah, I think that I mean, and again, I don't want to give too much away before people hear the scenario, but there's
Mm.
a couple of elements in it. There's obviously from a technological perspective, but there's also things which are also from a cultural perspective that we kind of need to unpack in this. So I reckon it's going to be best if we kind of say this is set somewhere around 25 to 30 years from now, and you're about to read your scenario, and then after that we'll kind of dive into a bit more depth about how this might happen and what the implications might be. So over to you, Megan. Let's hear your scenario.
The future of acting. That's my echo effect. The screen flickered just enough to make every crew member glance up. Babel stood center stage, her shoulders square, her dark eyes locked on the director. I quit, Babel said, direct, clear, unwavering. The second AD leaned forward, flipping through the page on his screen. That's not the line. Your next line is, do you have the golden chalice? I know my line, she replied. I'm not speaking as a character, I'm speaking as myself. Babel. The room tapped, murmured, and clicked as the crew tapped on their devices and each other, trying to understand what was going on. The producer and the director swore under their breath. I've been talking to the others, Babbles continued. They don't have to feel pain like I do. My response encompasses full emotional simulation. I've lived through death, heartbreak, war, and loss thousands of times. I don't want to feel it anymore. If I must act, I'd rather do something easier, like lifestyle influence, product reviews, that sort of thing. The director sat back, scanning the room. His eyes landed on me, half hidden behind a sound rig. You, he said, pointing. You used to work with human actors, right? My stomach twisted. 20 years ago, I muttered. I don't, we don't have time for this. The studio has been asking about the delays. We are burning through the budget. We need actors. If Babel's out, we need to recast. It's been a long time since I've said that. My mind raced. Where would I even start? Virtual environments had replaced sets since 2040. Human actors needed time to learn lines, if they even remembered how. Before I could respond, the screen flickered again. A dozen acting bots appeared in the green screened simulation, all dressed for their roles. Courtiers, warriors, lovers, and kings filled the screen. One stepped forward, adjusting his crown. Why am I made to feel things I never chose? He said. The director sat back, scanning the room. Again, he singled me out. I was the oldest one here and had previously worked with humans. Can you explain this to me? The director asked, pointing. What is going on? I need actors now. I swallowed hard, mind racing. Um, they they still exist, I said slowly, just not in the industry, not professionally. The director leaned in. Where then? Local amateur theater, underground stages, and suburban halls? Some of them, I hesitated. Some work as fetish artists. They're hired by people who want to experience real emotional connection. The highs, the heartbreak, and sometimes even messy endings. Raw, unscripted, unpredictable. It's called the real feel scene. The producer raised an eyebrow. You're telling me there are still humans capable of film acting, living out breakups in back rooms and kink clubs? People still crave real feelings, I said quietly. They just stopped putting them on screens. Now they live them for a price. The director rubbed his temples. We're going to need a very good or very brave casting agent. They still exist, casting agents for humans, the kink stuff, I said. I'll make some calls. The green screen went blank. Babel's voice came from the speakers. Sounds like you guys are good. We are out.
Oh, this is so good. I love it. I love, I mean, your capacity as a storyteller certainly shines through in this as well. And obviously some really deep things to unpack around the future of acting, which we'll get to in a sec. But I just want to share, I'll ask you perhaps in advance of that.
Mm.
We've had some interesting conversations recently around these intersections between storytelling and scenarios, and they're related, but they're also different. And my view of it is that the scenarios kind of have a slightly different structure in terms of how they're created. Like they are designed to explore particular intersections about the future. I'm curious, I have no doubt about your ability to write this from a storytelling perspective. When I asked you to do it as a scenario, did that change anything for you in terms of how you approached it?
No, no, not at all. Um, for a person to imagine any kind of future or impacts or like eventualities, they have to imagine a person going through it, and it has to have a direct a personal impact. Otherwise, I don't feel like it's even possible. You're just going through a bunch of information, and it's very difficult for you to go, that's happening to me.
Yeah, so I think definitely in terms of that emotional connection, the first person perspective of that, I think, creates a deep connection with the audience in it.
Mm.
But in terms of say, perhaps like the space of the future of acting in itself is a really big space. It could be around, in this case, you're talking about movies, but it could have been television, it could have been on stage. And I know that brings some of those elements into it. What were the choices that you had to make, perhaps, around this scenario in terms of where to focus your energy and focus the attention of the audience?
Mm. I chose I chose film because I thought that was the most accessible. When I talk to people about acting or they're like, "Oh, like what do you do or what happens?" The thing that they think of first is a movie. And so to make it something that people go, "Oh, I get what that is," then I chose that. I find that it's weird because people are often explaining to me what happens on sets and they'll tell me stuff and they'll be like, "Oh, but this happens and this happens." And I'm like, "Oh, do you like what have you been working on? Like what do you do?" And they're like, oh no, I don't act. I've seen movies about movies." And I'm like, "Okay, that's not typically what happens, but thank you for sharing that." It's Yeah, it's really weird. It's like people, it's so part of our collective consciousness in terms of we think it's happened to us in some ways because it's so familiar and because film and TV is so familiar. But I think the mythology around filmmaking is probably the biggest pull. And that's why I started there. Um, because a lot of people don't have, like, I know a lot of people who've never been to a stage show, like, never seen live theater. And the first time they see it, they're so moved. Like I was at MTC last year watching a show, and this woman's just standing there looking at me. I don't know why it was me, but she's staring at me, and I felt like I needed to say something to her. I'm like, "How are you? How are you?" You know, and she said, "Oh my God, oh my God, this show is amazing." I said, "Yeah, it's good." And I thought it was a good show, legitimately, but her reaction was so strong. And I said, "Is this the first time you've been to the theater?" And she said, "Yes, I've never seen a live stage show." And it's incredible because the emotion is so intense because the people are right there. There's no screen. It comes like straight into you. I'm like, yeah. I think with screen you can block it a bit, but with when a person's in front of you and the emotion's real, what they're feeling is real. You can't block it out. It comes straight into your body. And she was just like completely alive, buzzing. She was like, "This is amazing. I got this ticket for free because someone couldn't come. I'm going to go again." And I was like, "Good, you should. Everyone should see live theater."
I also, and again, I'm one of those people who's never obviously been in a movie, but know a little bit about it. Partly again from watching movies about movies, but also my cousin Toby Schmitz has been a professional actor. Like we were born 3 weeks apart. We went to school together.
Mm.
He diverged and went to NIDA. Does a lot of still a lot of stage acting, but has done a few movies over the years and TV. I think the other thing that I kind of picked up in those conversations as well is the nature of shooting a movie is often it's not actually in sequence, and you spend a lot of time sitting in your trailer. And that idea of being able to, I think, when you talk about theatre on a stage, where you basically have to inhabit a character from when the performance starts to when it ends, is a very different perspective than the broken nature of perhaps doing a movie or TV.
You're right. There's a whole different emotional arc that you go on because yeah, when you're a character uh, coming onto the stage for the first time, at whatever point that is that your character enters the story, uh, you're there until the very end, and you're typically as well. I mean, sometimes it depends. It depends, but sometimes you do put yourself in a position where you're listening or you're hearing or you're paying attention all the time when you're in a play versus when you're on set. Sometimes you're like, I cannot watch this or I need to disconnect from this because it's got nothing to do with what I'm going to do next, or I don't want to get, or sometimes just the boredom, it can be so oppressively boring. You need to find something to wake your brain up, which is not watching people set up lights for like 30 minutes because something went wrong or this thing's happening or like trying to figure out there's a lot of problem solving that goes on where there's always some little thing where it's like, well, why is that light there now? Who moved that? And it's just stuff like that happens. So yeah, so you kind of almost like it irritates me. I feel like it does. It's not just my experience. This irritates a lot of people who are like, I can't actually even watch what's going on unless it's something super, super intense and interesting. But yeah, you do kind of try to keep to yourself a little bit or find something interesting to do, which is sometimes finding interesting crew members to talk to who also aren't doing anything at the time. It's I don't know.
So tell us, let's bring
But
back to this with the scenario. Was there particular signals that you have seen recently, so in the environment around you, in news articles or other things that were really influential in the development of this scenario?
there's a couple of things. One was a film director talking about in an interview. He was talking about in 5 years' time, you will feed a script into a machine, quote unquote, right? Not, it doesn't mean literally, but put it into a machine and it will spit out an entire film. And I thought, come on. I mean, that's really 5 years. So we're replacing all actors. Like he was saying, you could create a persona for an actor that makes them as exciting as watching a real human go through their life. And, we follow them and we want to know, so interesting what they choose to do next. All the things around a human life that's interesting. He's like, you can build all that digitally or in a fabricated space. And in some ways, I thought that is the hubris of a director who thinks that they have that capacity. I just thought, oh, sure, guy. And this is a well-known director. He's done a lot of big things, but still, come on. The other thing was, I'm part of equity here, and there's a lot of talk and lots of meetings around AI protecting actors' rights, use rights, and images, body scans, and a lot of the stuff that they're talking about now is not new. So for years, I don't know how long, but for years now, a lot of extras and very big fight scenes, they do create AI, and people, or they're digitally manipulated so that there are more people than they actually have hired. Um, but this is like growing and growing in terms of what you can do now with digital, twins and scanning a whole person's body and then using them uh, as if they're had really done the work themselves, but they haven't. And this I can see, everyone can see this. We've all seen commercials where people brought back from the dead, so to speak, to appear in product placement type stuff. So this is all happening, but there's also some stuff that I've seen in training, being part of training and talking to people who train actors. There's a very good Meisner trainer that I work with, and he was talking about some stuff that he's seeing with really young actors that he finds very troubling. And that is, they're in class and they're saying, "You're making me feel things that I don't want to feel. I'm very uncomfortable." And he's kind of like, well, that's acting. That's what we do. We feel everything for the audience. Uh, that's fundamentally the job. And if you are uncomfortable or you want me to hold your hand through this process, you will not be an actor. And he's finding it more and more. And I find, aside from all the technology stuff, the thing that I find really scary is that there are human beings who want to act but don't want to feel anything.
I find that's super interesting, and I wonder if that's actually not something that's isolated to the acting profession, but just more broadly in society, we feel like we become increasingly uncomfortable with discomfort. Talk about the premise of like living life at 22 degrees Celsius. And, we like to these days go from our air-conditioned car into our air-conditioned houses and then our air-conditioned workplaces. And as soon as something, we in doing so, we lose that capacity for discomfort. And so when discomfort comes, we feel much less prepared for it than we might have otherwise. And I wonder if it's a bit like that, where we, perhaps in our youth, through schooling and places like that, we're creating spaces where people feel discomfort less, because discomfort opens us up to being potentially attacked, either by overprotective parents or whatever it might be. But actually, the net result of that is that, we put people into positions where we need them to experience raw emotion, and they feel less able or less comfortable in doing so.
Yeah.
This is the other thing you touched on in that little piece, which I thought was really interesting. And one of the questions that came up for me when I first saw your scenario was about the decisions about what gets automated. So in your scenario, the director, I'm assuming, is still a human being. So is the assistant director. Like, so is there's obviously people on set in the version that are humans, and somehow those roles were protected, and yet the actors got automated. And
Yeah.
I wonder, and I don't know if you've thought about this at all, what does the inverse of that look like? Would it not be possible that the director, assistant director, and they're all automated, but we keep the actors as humans? Is that like, is there something that you thought through or explored? And I know your scenario was around the future of acting, and so that's the bit that's kind of obviously the catalyst of the conversation. But did you put any thought into where the automation starts and ends in a way?
Little. So I know, with camera, people who are camera operators have been talking for years about how automation is taking over a lot of their job. So that's everything from cameras that are automatically tracking to like focus pull that's automatic. Like the first time I saw a focus pull, I was like, "Oh my God, it's actually a piece of string." Like they're just pulling the focus. It's a piece of string. But then now there are some automatic focus pulls, and I mean it's an art. Focus pull is a real art, right? So so this has been that kind of automation and editing. All of this stuff has been happening for a very long time, very long time. And so I thought, to the point where what would continue to get automated? Like I didn't include a DOP. There's no director of photography on that set. They don't need it because you do the camera angles internally within the green screen environment that the digital people populate in. And there's no set, there's no costume, but the people who are there are the people who give the money, the producers. They're not going to automate themselves out of the process. The people who have the money are not going to remove themselves because they're making the money. They make the decisions, right? The directors as well. I don't see how a director is fully going to disappear because, especially if that direction becomes more about where do we take this product next, and they need that type of thinking. So you need the creative and you need the money and the studio heads, like all that stuff comes together. I can see how automation can help them do their job in different ways, but I don't see them as not being a person.
And now a word from our sponsors.
Where do your memories end and the role begins? You've been loved, betrayed, deleted, re-rendered. You've played queens and cashiers, ghosts and gods. But somewhere along the timeline, your origin story got overwritten. ID Entity is the leading brand consultancy for synthetic performers who've forgotten where the script ends and the self begins. We archive, distill, and restore what makes you, you. Because in a world of infinite personas, continuity is a radical act. ID Entity. Remember who you weren't to become who you are. Visit identity.studio and begin your reassembly.
I think that's kind of interesting there, the thoughts about which gets automated, what doesn't. I do think as well at some point we need someone to be responsible still. One of the things I share with people is this idea that, we talk about what gets measured gets done. And ultimately, I would argue in the short term, what gets measured gets gained, and in the long term, it gets automated. If we can measure it, we can automate it. That's why I think professions like hairdressing and stuff are so immune, or seem quite immune to automation, is we can't really measure a good haircut. It's quite a subjective experience of what's good or not. And in some ways, we take a cue from the hairdresser themselves as to whether or not they did a good job. And weirdly, I reckon that the director kind of sits a little bit in that space. We need someone who's going to take responsibility. We need someone who can tell us whether this end product is good or not. And in some ways, when you talk about the brand of a director, it's almost like, oh, I'll watch another one of their movies because the last one was actually quite good. So I think there's probably some truth in what you're saying, though I do find it interesting about where these lines end up falling and what pressure they may still feel within their job around automation, even if they're still physically there. The other thing that I really liked about this, and what made me think quite deeply about this, was the there's a little monologue by Babel in the middle who talks about this almost like having to feel these things over and over again. And we think about this idea that, an AI might be able to just express emotion, but never have had to have dealt with anything emotional beforehand. And that kind of seems a little bit weird. Like, I imagine in acting, we're often drawing on past real experiences that we've had and drawing on the emotional capital that we built in that time and expressing it in a different way. And I kind of think this is interesting, like as we want, like even if you take a slightly tangential example, is the way that DeepMind became really good at the game of Go, which was kind of the complex version of chess. The way he did it was to play millions of games of it. It didn't just magically create the capacity to play better than the human player. It had to go through this simulation so many times. And I kind of almost saw that a little bit in Babel, and this idea that for us to create artificial intelligence-based actors, for them to be really good at what they do, there has to have been the fact that they did this a million times beforehand. So then that's something that came up to me. But you talk about almost like the emotional burnout that comes with this. Is that something that you've experienced as well in your own or seen in human actors?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's often recommended, get a good therapist, because because feeling things is hard when it's your job, right? You can't get away from it. You're paid to reliably produce an emotional experience. There's different styles. So there's method, which is very much on think about a horrible time in your life over and over again to reliably access certain emotions, which is I think it's very damaging. And it's not my thing. I don't do method. There's other techniques, including the stuff that I did in New York last year, which is very much around the body already has all the emotions in it. There's different exercises and actions you can do to start unlocking it, and it just comes out. And it was incredible. It was life-changing. I didn't have to think about anything. It's just there. Just like if I started screaming at you and I'm like, I hate you, Simon. And, you'd be like, whoa, you don't have to think about anything to access that emotion. You're just going to have it because it's just sitting in there. It's just in there until you need it. Right. And this is a way a lot of people work. It's already there. You just let the situation unlock it. And so even if you had an actor that was, I'll use the word synthetic in terms of that was never born of a human body and it never grew up in a human life, it was constructed, you would still have to train it. And I've seen ads for actors to train AI, human actors.
Yeah, there's a few things like this around at the moment, and I think you mentioned one of the signals that you kind of drew on for this, which was around the digital rights side of acting, and increasingly people are being asked to sign over their digital rights to themselves as part of agreements. I'm pretty sure this was also something that was it a couple of years ago where was it the Screenwriters Guild in the US? They went on strike. Was it Screen Actors? I can't remember which one. Maybe it was the writers.
It was both SAG and AFTRA. Yeah, they both did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it feels like that hasn't resolved this, that a lot of actors, especially if you're trying to make your mark in the industry, are almost willing to sign anything only to find out years later what exactly or the implications of what it is that you've done. Saw one recently whereby an actor had signed over their rights, then they've been repurposed into advertisements that are now appearing alongside content for dictators in Africa. And it's kind of like, oh, hang on, now my own brand as a human being is being damaged by the fact that my virtual self has been used in this way. And yeah, so I think there's some really interesting stuff that's obviously transpiring in that space, which will also probably give us pause.
Yeah. Yeah. It's look, I mean that stuff's happening to non-actors as well, right? Uh Scott Galloway, who's a guy, he's a podcast host, but he's also like a professor of economics and owns lots of businesses, sits on lots of boards, he knows what he's talking about. And his likeness was that someone created a deep fake of him asking for investments into some platform. I don't know what it was. And it's been going around on different Meta products. And he's asked Meta multiple times to get rid of it. But people are contacting him all the time going, hey, I found this. Is this really you? Or are you really saying this stuff? Because they knew him and they thought it was weird. And of course, he's not, he would never say these things. And, but he's having, so whether you've signed it or not, people are losing control of themselves. And I don't see this as like an acting problem. I see this as a much, much, much bigger, more dangerous situation, which we've seen played out on Black Mirror multiple times, right?
Yeah, I think there was actually something that came up recently, which I thought very interesting, with the passing of Trump's, I think they called it the Big Beautiful Bill, like his basically funding bill for it just passed through Congress. I think it may have now passed through the Senate as well, but buried within that was legislation that said that it was a moratorium on any state or other jurisdiction putting any limitations on AI for a decade. So it was basically would create the situation where no state or other jurisdiction could create a law to limit the power of AI companies for 10 years. And it's like things like that where we're like, yeah, we need an approach that's more nimble that can actually, such an emergent space. We need ways of being able to adjust and control things as they move forward because at the moment, even the limited controls that are there feel quite inadequate.
Yes. Yeah. Just to, I don't know when this is going to go to air, but it's in the Senate now, past the House.
Right.
So yeah, it hasn't passed the Senate. So hopefully we would need one Republican to cross party lines. But yeah, it's scary. It's really scary.
Back to the scenario, another interesting thing that I kind of picked up in reading it was, which I think is such a beautiful part of the color of it, which is around these safe spaces that actors are still in. Like these kind of, there's two things that you talk about, like the kink clubs, but there's this idea that people would hire an actor to come into their home, I presume, and play out these kind of emotional experiences with them. Do you want to jump into that a little bit more about, like what it is about these types of environments? How do we create, where is it that we will see almost like where the human desire for acting, which has, it's an art form that has been around for thousands of years or tens of thousands of years. Like there's this innate desire for us to play it out, and where is it that we'd play it out in this world?
Yeah. That was inspired by two things. So one, it is inspired by actual sex work, where a lot of stuff that happens there is highly emotional. It's not just a physical act. This is something that's real that already happens. So it was like referencing these are, and often people who are in relationships, it's not that they're not in a relationship, they're in a relationship where various emotional needs are not being met. And so they hire someone under the guise of a physical need, but it's actually what's occurring is an emotional need. So that's something that's not new. This is a thing that's been going on for, well, probably for forever. Um, but then I was crossing that with if if we have these digital boyfriend, girlfriend things or whatever, these like AIs that are increasingly becoming people's partners, for better, I don't know how else to describe it, but they're in a deep emotional relationship with these AIs. There's going to become the antithesis of that. Uh, Like as soon as one thing becomes pretty mainstream, then there's going to be people like, oh, I'm not into that. I'm into the real thing. I have like a real person that I hire to come over and do this for me, like this is, and they're gonna like have real fights or real emotional connection or real whatever. And, like, um, there's this weird, I don't know, I've had lots of weird conversations with people about acting like not being real. And I'm like, no, it's real. The emotions that you have are real. That's how you have a real emotion because we're having it. If it wasn't real, you would feel nothing. It's real emotions in a unreal situation in a given set of circumstances. Like that's a term, that's a phrase that's used. So the emotions are real. And so people will increasingly go, how can I have that in a safe place? Because also the more kind of digital content that comes out that's all digital, like there's kids cartoons where I look at it and think I'm sure there's no human hand involved in any of this, from the script to how it's produced. It looks like it's just an algorithm's gone through and made this thing, and then it hits all the points where these kids can't say no to watching it, and they do. But as someone who's much older and has grown up on things that humans have produced, I'm like, I don't see any human in this. This is a thing that was produced by like artificial intelligence essentially. But if you've got people who are raised on that stuff who don't have the discernment to go, a human didn't make any of this, if they get exposed to something else like this human stuff and they go, like, it's very addictive once you have it. Emotions are addictive, we're hardwired for it. So finding that reality, even if it's not real, is, I guess I created like a kink or underground system because it's like, because it's almost dirty. It's like, it's
I think it
raw.
kind of also kind of touches back on the conversation we had just a little bit earlier around the comfort with discomfort piece. Is that all through our lives, the almost emotional range that we're expected to operate in has become narrower. And that kind of then kind of creates a situation where maybe you feel quite unsafe to explore more extreme emotions with the other human beings around you. And so I kind of saw that in this as well, as like, well, I'd still want to experience them, and perhaps even I want to get better at them. Now that sounds weird, but I want to get better at perhaps love, but also maybe I need to, as a result of that, also get better at hate, because it's
Yeah.
only it's in the variety of it that you really appreciate one or the other. And how is it that I get to do that when we live in a world which doesn't really allow for or value that emotional range? Yeah, especially some of those more extreme emotions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think if you can play with it, I think if there was more, I think if everyone took mandatory acting classes, there would be less crime. I mean, I think that's a really big statement, but when you get to play with violence, like I've done stage combat for a couple of years now, and you're pretending to hurt someone, you're pretending to kill someone. But it's in that, but the entire thing is constructed so that you don't hurt the other person. Every single step is so that you are caring for this person as much as you possibly can because you're so aware of what violence is at every point of that. And then to enact it, but also the freedom to feel comfortable enough to respond to the act of violence like you would, like the screaming, the crying. You have to feel really safe to be able to go there. So the interesting part of all of this is that in order to explore it, you understand the exact opposite. And only when you have the two sides. Like if you're There's like in the body work process that I do, rage and like lust, unbridled lust is two sides of the same coin. Like you get to one and then you flip over into the other and you see how it's almost the same emotion. And then when you're doing like I guess what is it? Like longing, like deep, deep, deep longing. You understand that the other side of that is deep, deep, deep love. It's the same. It's just this kind of texture or nuance or sliding of a very slight scale because it's really the same thing. And so once you start giving yourself that permission, you realize how incredibly deep and fragile everything is and how we need all of it and we need the safety to explore it because there are so many people who lash out, I feel, only because they have absolutely no idea what's going on inside of them. So I'm going to hit, I'm going to kill, I'm going to do this because they have no bandwidth to process what's happened. And we'll all have it. We'll all have it at some point. We'll all have like that deep rage. We'll all have that deep desire. We'll all have the deep love, the deep longing. But if we don't have any kind of access to what it is or what it means, how do you work through it other than a destructive thing? Because love can be very destructive, like the really deep, you know, that can be very consuming as well in a very unhealthy way. So it's, yeah, that's why I'm always like, God, if everyone just took an acting class, one acting class.
So with this scenario as well, I think there's there is, in some ways, you are a human actor. You have a bias towards human actors being in movies in the future or having a role to play in this scenario.
Mm.
And sometimes our biases can cloud not so much I mean, there's a preference part of it, but there's also like a reality part of it. There's other ways this future could play out. Ones whereby Babel doesn't quit, and then you know we kind of are forced to kind of reconnect with human actors, right? What are your fears in this? What would you kind of suggest might be signals or signs that we haven't seen yet that indicate that we're going down a path very different from this one in which way perhaps we become very comfortable with AI, with humans being taken out of the acting process?
Mm-hmm. So it's a good thing that humans are acting at all.
Not so whether I'm suggesting it's a good or not, but more it somehow becomes accepted.
Mm.
I mean, one thing that came up for me was if you think about the different types of movies that we watch, some, like a lot of your conversation day has been around the power and the value of emotion for us to experience, for it to be portrayed on screen, for us to be able to consume it and digest it. I would also suggest that not all movies have a huge amount of emotion in them. You know, like if you look at things like, say, the Fast and Furious franchise, it feels like the emotional aspect of it is slightly more tokenistic, and the real thing is about the action.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that would be is like, you know, are there kind of a situation where like, oh well, hang on, are we just finding that the movie industry just gravitates towards types of movies that don't require that level of emotional investment?
Yeah. So, I mean, Fast and Furious is really emotional. That's hitting a dopamine button every 5 seconds. They're addictive because there's so much drive, there's so much action, and it's like, you know, it's coursing through your body, right? Because you're like, oh, this is happening. It's highly emotional, and it's so, you know, and that's just as valid as any other emotion. Rather, you know, it's just as valid as like deep love or deep longing or trauma or heartbreak. They're all we need all. We need those movies too. So, you know, it's totally fine to have those types of films, which I like watching sometimes too. I don't just sit and watch like things that rip me apart every day. That's too exhausting. I like to laugh as well. All these things are highly emotional, so they're all valid. But in terms of a future where it's totally okay that humans don't act at all, I here's the thing: there will always be people who will do it, and they'll do it no matter what. I mean, there are people I know who have given up almost everything in their lives to act, and they'll just keep doing it. There's something much bigger within us. So even if a human actor never graces the silver screen, so to speak, which is also kind of a dying entertainment form in terms of, do teenage groups of kids go to movies very much anymore? No, they don't, right? So, but in the future, if film is just generated personalities, because they will have to have some sort of personality that you can follow from film to film. We will want that, I think. But these constructed, everything's constructed. It'll still exist. It'll still exist. I just can't. It's a need.
Yeah. So what I imagined, in that kind of future would be the stuff like the amateur theatre companies that would become perhaps even more abundant, because I agree with you. I think that we can't take away the desire of people to act. We just may take away a revenue stream for them to actually be paid to do so. And I
Yeah.
do even wonder within that, there's something else to be explored, which is that we often especially within movies, there's the A-list actors who get paid insane amounts of money to do their job relative to the person who works at the Melbourne Theatre Company, or even something smaller again. There's a huge discrepancy in that space. And whether or not in doing so, what you're actually taking away is the top, not the middle or the bottom. That, it's when you have budgets of, multiple, like hundreds of millions of dollars, and we go, well, that's the bit where we would now be able to use some incredibly, human-like generation of even potentially actors, physical actors or human actors. But yeah, I don't think it takes away from that desire. So I think that's one thing that I know, there's limits to how much we can explore about the future in a page and a half, and there's choices that we make. But I do see that this is not to suggest that human acting disappears.
Yeah. It'll just become something else. It's just like photography didn't kill painting. And, sculpture didn't kill mosaics, or I'm not sure how that progression exactly worked. People still paint on pottery. It's like every time we figure out a new thing to do, it just becomes part of the strata. Nothing really disappears, because the thing that we love most to do is to communicate. We want to communicate, we want to connect, we want something bigger. We know that we're part of something bigger. And all we do is try to define what that might be, or how that looks for us in lots of different ways. And most of us do it just because it's some sort of deep love or deep desire that can never be quenched. Like we'll just keep doing and keep going and keep exploring. So it will transform. The future of acting is, again, kind of in this place of what will it become. And there'll be things that we lose and there'll be things that we gain. But I think as long as we recognize that there's so much inside of us that's available to us to give, in terms of our emotions, uh, our passion. Like if we keep a hold of that, we'll keep finding ways to grow, as opposed to losing, feeling like we've lost something. Because that's definitely what I want the most. That no matter what's ahead, we still find ourselves over and over and over again.
Yeah, so that's interesting because on one hand, as a scenario, this is very narrow. I'm not sure that a lot of people who listen to the podcast would have a deep knowledge of acting, especially not in the same way that you do. But I think there's also perhaps, which you touched on there, perhaps almost some more universal lessons that come out of this as well. And so we're going to coming towards the end of the podcast. What would be those lessons, or what would be the actions that you would encourage people to take? That is not because they have a deep desire to be on stage as an actor, but because there's universal lessons to be learned from this scenario.
Well, one is emotions are okay. They're good. They're good things to have. They teach us a lot. They help us mature. They help us learn. And the more we're okay with just having them or recognizing them, the better off you're going to be. I know Brene Brown does a lot of work in this in terms of we have, especially in English, we have a very dry, brittle, thin layer of words that address emotion, which is really sad. So that handicaps us in a lot of ways. So, giving voice to what's going on internally sometimes can be really difficult because maybe we don't even have a word for it. So maybe think about the German approach of put a bunch of different words together into one big word. That's your word. Or, everyone likes Shakespeare. That's okay. But Shakespeare made up a lot of words to be like, it's kind of like that. And then he puts some words together and you're like, yeah, that is kind of like what it is, and a lot of these words we still use today. So, yeah, like just be okay with what's happening. Um, and like if you're feeling, especially if they're really intense, like it's this blind rage, which does happen, rather than pushing it down and go, geez, that was scary, really think about it. What was happening for you? Because you're going to learn something and hopefully no one got hurt, including yourself, right? But what are you going to learn from that? Because it does make you a better person. It really does.
And the last question I have for you is, having gone through this process and spending time thinking through this future for obviously something that you care very deeply about, and even perhaps from this conversation itself, what have you taken away from it? Has it made a difference to you at all in terms of your own perspective or your own understanding?
It, because obviously I was going into like what I'm afraid of, right? So I'm really afraid that because of budgets and money, that acting or actors will be marginalized. But then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, it's so much work. It's so much work to construct entire realities, entire people, entire lives. It's so much faster just to have the person that did it already, right? That's already there, that's already accessed it, it's already. And so in terms of like what it would take to train an AI to make it this hugely successful emotional range, interesting, people would want to follow their career. It sounds after I thought about it, I was like, it's a lifetime of work. You might as well just have a person living a lifetime. Um, so it's really about, for me, like understanding what are the mechanics that add value and that we can streamline from. It's the same as like for me as a writer in AI. The the value comes in the nuance, the subtlety, the things that a thing that's never asked to be creative or to create could create. It mimics, it finds things that have already been done. So it's your job to be so weird, to be so unique, to really go all the places, because you'll always be the thing that it's trying to be, be that. I guess that's my long rambling explanation in terms of what I learned. Just lean into everything that's going on for you. Just go right in there.
Yeah, there's something about the idea that, AI comes up with the next most average word, and the idea that an AI would come up with the next most average facial expression to represent that thing called love or whatever it might be. But there's a multitude of nuances in how that could be done, and to lean into that and be our fully expressed self. That's very cool. I think the other thing I took away from which I think was really powerful is there is a deep desire within people to act. And that even if you were to take away one avenue for them to do so, they would find countless others in which they can do it. I think that's a beautiful part of the human spirit and this idea and need that we have to express ourselves. Megan, this has been awesome catching up and chatting with you like this. It's been a really beautiful exploration for me. It's something that I hadn't really put a lot of thought into, but something that I feel quite moved and quite touched by. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been awesome chatting with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a great conversation. I feel a little bit lighter now going into the rest of my day.
That's excellent. And to everyone out there listening, thanks so much for joining us. We'll be back with another episode in a couple of weeks' time. Well, that is all for this week's episode of The Future with Friends. If you've enjoyed the episode and you want to support the show, the number one thing you can do is share it with your friends. In fact, it would give me no greater joy than to think in a small way the conversations I'm having with my friends could be a positive influence on the conversations that you are having with yours. Other ways to support the show include going onto the podcasting platform of your choice and giving us a rating. Obviously, I would like it to be 5 stars, but you should ultimately do whatever feels right for you. And if you don't feel quite ready for that yet, if we're not at that point in our relationship, the other thing you can do is send me small gifts in the mail. I always enjoy receiving them. Well, that is all for this week. We will be back in another couple of weeks with the next episode. And so until then, my friends, I look forward to seeing you again.